right, so let's get started. So again, we are going to see the Renaissance today. So the Renaissance, we heard the Renaissance, the term a lot. What's the Renaissance? Can you guess what the Renaissance is? What is that? We heard that many times, but do you know what it is?
It's the Enlightenment era in the Middle Age.
It
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it happened after Middle Age actually. So yeah, but it was very close, very good. So it's one of the biggest culture movement in history between 15th and the 17th centuries. The Renaissance happened in the literature, music, art, architecture, and all kinds of intelligence. So let me show you how it begins first. So, we learned the Middle Ages in the last meeting. The church, in the Middle Ages, the church had taught that mankind was not worthless in the eyes of God. So this era is called like the Dark Ages. All kinds of culture and art were oppressed by church at the time, and artists during the Middle Age were considered skilled crafts workers. So for the resistance of Middle Ages, the Renaissance came into the world. So the word Renaissance means rebirth, and it refers to the revival of the interest in ancient Greek and the Roman culture. That is one of the most key characteristics of the period. Renaissance humanists believed in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. So there are many of artistic techniques developed by the Renaissance masters. The first one is perspective, which is creating an implied space. And the next one is chiaroscuro, which is modeling mass drawing technique based on lightness and darkness. And the third one is close observation of nature. And the fourth one is study of anatomy. And the last one is theories of beauty and proportion. So these established the painting, sculpture, mathematics. Artists were no longer mere craft workers. So the Renaissance arose in Italy, right here. So everyone, let's just think about the reason why the Renaissance began in Italy and why the Renaissance was in Italy the most popular. Can you guess the reasons? There are three reasons.
You asked, can you ask it again, the question? I'm sorry.
Why did the Renaissance begin in Italy? Can you guess the reason?
Is it because of the sophisticated art they already had going on with the sculptures and some of the more gifted people, Leonardo da Vinci and them?
Yeah, Leonardo da Vinci, yeah, he's the Renaissance master. Yeah, that's right. But why it happened in Italy? So you said like the masters are here in Italy. Yeah, that can be the one of the reasons.
And the capital of the church, because this whole thing is based around the church too. Like Rome, right? It was all like a Roman Empire. So Rome is in Italy.
There we go. Yes, yes, very good. So William just said the answer, one of the reason. So let's see the reasons together. So the first reason is that Italy was the powerful city-state, which was engaged in extensive trade, and the banking had developed. So their economic system was stable. So through history, most of culture were flourished when they had a stabilization of economy. And the next reason is the church. The church in Italy was an important patron of the arts. So it was centered in Italy as well. And the last reason is the ancient Rome. So Italians had long lived in the ruins of ancient Rome, and they viewed themselves as the direct descendants of the citizens of the earlier. So these three factors made that the early and high Renaissance are developed in Italy. So now we will see the great masters of the Renaissance. So there are three masters we are going to see today. And the first master we are going to see is Leonardo da Vinci. So everyone knows Leonardo da Vinci. So Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, sculptor, poet, architect, engineer, scientist, musician, and all-round intellectual. Leonardo da Vinci is the artist who most embodies the term Renaissance man. Many people consider him to have been the greatest genius who ever lived. So he was possessed of a brilliant and inquiring mind that accepted no limits. So he was very interested in human body, like the skeleton, muscles, organs, etc. Also, he anatomized dead bodies to study skeletal system, muscle, and even organs and pregnancy. So looks familiar with us, right? This is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. He depicted the consternation that occurred among the 12 apostles when Jesus announced that one of them would betray him. Leonardo da Vinci used perspective technique to show an implied space on the two-dimensional flat surface. So in this painting, he used 1 point linear perspective with the vanishing point on the center of the implied space. So that technique is a good perspective for compacting many objects in a limited space. These are sketches to study 1 point perspective by Leonardo da Vinci. And this is a drawing to show the 1 point perspective with the human body proportion. So, this is the Mona Lisa. Probably everyone knows this, right? Which is an oil painting on a wood panel by Leonardo da Vinci. So probably the world's most famous painting. The painting was one of the first portraits to depict the cedar in front of an imaginary landscape. And Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first painters to use the aerial perspective to make the distance on the two-dimensional surface. Behind her, a vast landscape recedes to icy mountains, a winding path, and distant bridges give only the slightest indication of a human presence. Leonardo da Vinci has chosen to place the horizon line not on the neck, but on a level with the eyes, thus linking the figure with the landscape and emphasizing the mysterious nature of the painting. So let's take a look at this painting a little bit closer. I'm going to share a video about the Mona Lisa.
We're in the single most crowded room in the Louvre, but for good reason. This is the room that holds the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. Without a doubt, the most famous painting in the world.
Of course, it's her smile that's so famous today, and it certainly is a smile that doesn't clearly tell us what she's feeling. It's ambiguous.
And I think it allows people to read into it in any way that they prefer.
Sigmund Freud, for example, saw a combination of a maternal gaze, but also a gaze that was flirtatious. And I think I do see both of those aspects here. This is a portrait of the wife of a Florentine merchant. And as we look out at the sea of people taking selfies in front of the Mona Lisa, it's good to remember that only the elite could have their portrait painted during the Renaissance. This was an expensive proposition. And of course, you'd have to go and sit for the artist many times so that he could capture your likeness.
Because they were expensive, they were reserved for kings and queens and the nobility. What we see during the Renaissance is the growth of the merchant class. And the fact that a wealthy merchant would hire Leonardo to paint his wife's portrait is a reminder of the fortunes that are being made by traders, by bankers, and others during the Renaissance.
Well, especially in the city of Florence, which was such an economic hub during the Renaissance. And we know, in fact, that the patron of this painting was a cloth merchant.
This painting has quite a number of innovations, but one of the most important is that it's half-length. Generally, portraits were busts, that is, from the chest up.
This was an incredibly influential new formula for the portrait. If you think about the standard form of the portrait before this, with the figure in profile, bust length, it's a very static pose, very formal, very stiff. But as soon as Leonardo turned the head toward us, positioned the shoulders 3/4 toward us also, and included the hands, suddenly we had an image of a figure that was much more natural, someone who you could imagine having a conversation with. Portraits that included a background and that also included the hands did exist in the Northern Renaissance, but this is a new formula for Italy and will be tremendously influential with artists like Raphael and others.
Another very influential aspect of this painting is a technique that Leonardo employed, which is known as sfumato. That simply means smoke, and what it refers to is the slightly hazy quality that Leonardo introduces to remove the sometimes sharp quality that existed in early Renaissance paintings, where each object looks too isolated. It's an atmospheric quality that creates a sense of unity throughout the painting.
And makes the figure appear to almost emerge out of the darkness. So we see that she's seated on a chair in a loggia or open porchway, and we see on either side of her what look like the base of two columns. We don't know if the painting was cut down and there were originally full columns on either side of her, but we do know that early copies of this painting do show those columns on either side of the figure.
There's a lot about this painting that we don't fully understand. This was a commission, and yet Leonardo kept the painting. He never delivered it to the man who commissioned it. And later in Leonardo's life, when he moved to France, he brought the painting with him, which is why it's now in the Louvre. One question that I think we should address is, why is this the most famous image in the world?
Well, it reminds me of another very famous image of a woman that's very ambiguous and mysterious, and that's the woman with the pearl earring by Vermeer from more than a century later. Perhaps our culture has some fascination with images of mysterious women.
I think that's probably an important part of it, but then I think fame grows on itself. In 1911, the painting was stolen, and it was headlines around the world, and that accelerated its fame, and it has become the subject of numerous other paintings by artists as diverse as Marcel Duchamp or Andy Warhol. This raises an interesting issue. Here's a painting that was made for a private home, to exist in a domestic interior, to celebrate a man's wife, or to celebrate a specific occasion, perhaps the birth of a child or the purchasing of a new home. But here it is instead in a huge gallery with hundreds of people, a painting that exists this in millions of multiples around the world. It's such an unexpected fate for what Leonardo surely saw as a relatively minor commission.
All right. That was Mona Lisa. Now let's move on to the next master of the Renaissance, Michelangelo. So Michelangelo had established his reputation as a sculptor by the age of 25. The David statue, now we saw it before. So this one, it made so popular, he began serious work as an artist at the age of 13, and he did not stop until that claimed him 76 years later. So his name means Archangel Michael, and to his contemporaries and those who came after, his stature is scarcely less than that of the heavenly being. So Michelangelo was Leonardo da Vinci's rival, and he began his career in Florence, but also worked in Rome. So this is the most famous Michelangelo's work, and he had established his reputation as this sculptor. So this David statue is not a simple restatement of Greek art. He studied human anatomy and had dissected corpses. He translated his knowledge into a figure that seems to be made of muscle and flesh and bone, though all in marble. So let me share a video to see this work closer.
Florence was long an economic powerhouse. Rather than its church, it's the city hall, once the palace of the Medici family that towers over the main square. Michelangelo's David originally stood here. This is a copy. The original David is the centerpiece of the nearby Accademia Gallery, which feels like a temple to humanism. At its altar, one very impressive human. The shepherd boy, David, sizes up the giant. Thoughtful and self-assured, he seems to be thinking, I can take him. The statue was an apt symbol, inspiring Florentines to tackle their Goliaths. When you look at David, you're looking at Renaissance man. Artists now made their point using realism. They did this by merging art and science. For instance, Michelangelo actually dissected human corpses to better understand anatomy. This humanism was not anti-religion. Now people realized that the best way to glorify God was not to bow down in church all day long, but to recognize their talents and to use them. Artists like Michelangelo even exaggerated realism to make their point. Notice David's large and overdeveloped right hand. This is symbolic of the hand of God. It was God that powered David to slay the giant. And Florentines like to think God's favor enabled them to rise above rival neighboring city-states. The nave-like hall leading to David is lined with Michelangelo's unfinished prisoners, struggling to break out of the marble. Michelangelo believed these figures were divinely created within the rock. He was simply chiseling away the excess. Here we see the Renaissance love of the body as Michelangelo reveals these compelling figures. While these statues are called unfinished, Perhaps Michelangelo was satisfied he'd set them free, and he moved on to other challenges.
All right. Looks amazing, right? You know what? This one is more amazing. So, Mike,
Yes, sir.
huh?
Oh, I was just going to say that, I've seen that statue so many times, and this is the first time that it brought my attention to the oversized right hand.
Ah,
I never noticed that until now, and I love the explanation behind it. So it's really cool.
yeah, it is. So, so now let's look at this, paintings, these amazing paintings together. So can you believe it? He painted, all of them. And then when you see the details, like, looks like the sculptures on the ceiling, but these are all paintings. These are all fresco paintings, there is no actual sculpture here. So Michelangelo embarked on the masterpiece that has become his best known work, the ceiling frescoes of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Rome. He had been called to Rome by Pope Julius II, who wanted the artist to design his tomb, a large monument with numerous sculptures and paintings. So this is one of the part of the ceiling painting. Let me share a video to see this amazing fresco painting.
So what moment in Rome?
Okay, let me just start it from the...
We're in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, which has tremendous importance to Catholicism. This is where the Pope will lead Mass, but perhaps most famously, this is the room that the College of Cardinals uses to decide the next Pope.
And every surface of this space is decorated, from the beautiful mosaics on the floor. The walls are painted with frescoes by early Renaissance artists. The wall behind the altar was painted by Michelangelo later in his life, and then, of course, the ceiling.
And everybody is looking up. Their necks are craned, and of course, it's magnificent. We're here in the late afternoon on a day in early July. The light is diffuse, and it makes those frescoed figures feel so dimensional. They feel like sculpture.
And you can imagine what it was like when this was unveiled in 1512, after Michelangelo had worked on it for years, how different, how revolutionary Michelangelo's figures seemed.
Well, he was first and foremost a sculptor, and it wasn't actually until a relatively recent cleaning that we knew his brilliance as a colorist. But for him, line and drawing and the act of carving figures out of paint was primary, and you have this extraordinary ability to render both strength and elegance simultaneously.
They have a massiveness and a presence that is charismatic, but there's also a sense of elegance and ideal beauty. So let's describe what we're looking at.
Okay, probably the most important are the series of 9 scenes that move across the central panels.
And those are framed by a painted architectural framework that looks real. It doesn't look like paint. And we start with the creation of the world, God separating light from darkness.
I love that scene. This primordial God, light on one side of his body and the darkness of night on the other. This initial separation and division to create order in the universe.
And then we move through to the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve,
Well, the separation of the sexes.
and the creation of God's most perfect creature, human beings, and then the fall of human beings.
In a sense, the separation of good and evil.
Man and woman disobeying God, causing the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, and then the far end, by the entrance, we see the scenes of Noah.
So these are all scenes from the first book of the Bible, from the book of Genesis. And it's so interesting because, of course, this is a Catholic church, and yet we don't see images of Christ. But these Old Testament scenes lay the foundation for the coming of Christ.
And Christ is present in other ways. Not only does the disobedience of Adam and Eve make the coming of Christ necessary, but when we look on either side of those central scenes, we see the prophets and the sibyls who predicted the coming of a Savior for mankind.
The image of the Libyan Sibyl that we're sitting directly across from is spectacularly beautiful. So Sibyls are these ancient pagan soothsayers who can foresee the future and, according to the Catholic tradition, foretell the coming of Christ. But look at the Libyan Sibyl. Look at the power of her body, and look at the elegance with which she twists and turns. There's that sense of potential in the way that her toe just reaches down and touches the ground, but seems as if she's in the act of moving and possibly of standing.
There's a presence and drama to these figures, to the Libyan Sibyl especially. She twists her body in an almost impossible way, and we can see Michelangelo has articulated every muscle in the back, and in fact we know that he used a male model for that figure.
I'm so taken with the color here. When I first studied Michelangelo, we spoke only of line, of sculptural form. But of course, after the dramatic cleaning of the Sistine Chapel, those original colors, their brilliance, their delicacy came out.
And we see purples and golds and oranges and blues and greens.
She, of course, is reaching back, and presumably that's a book of prophecy that she holds. And there's a look of confidence and knowing on her face, the absolute clarity with which she knows that Christ will come.
Sitting on the architectural framework on the four corners of all of the central scenes are male nude figures that we refer to as ignudi.
I think this is really important because Michelangelo is not painting simply separate paintings, but he's creating this enormously complex stage set with which to create levels of reality. And so, for example, the Libyan Sibyl seems as if she is seated amongst the architecture, and then set next to her are bronze figures. And then in the spandrels, as you mentioned, other scenes that seem to recede into a kind of illusionistic distance.
And then relief sculptures on the architecture on either side of her, and then seated above those, the ignudi. And it's so clear that we're at this moment at the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture, and Michelangelo is in Rome, he's in the Vatican.
This is the High Renaissance, and it's so interesting to compare the optimism, the elegance, the nobility of the figures on the ceiling with the far darker and more pessimistic view that Michelangelo will paint decades later on the back wall, The Last Judgment.
That's right. Well, there's a big difference between 1512, when Michelangelo completes the ceiling, and when he begins The Last Judgment. The Protestant Reformation has begun, and the church is under attack.
Michelangelo's world had been shattered, but when you look at the ceiling, you see instead all of the optimism, all of the intellectual and emotional power that characterizes the High Renaissance in all of its newfound appreciation for the ancient world. This was a moment of incredible promise, and all of that comes shining through these figures.
And let's not forget that just a few doors away, simultaneously, Raphael is painting the frescoes in the Papal Palace. So what a moment in Rome.
All right. How do you think? Is it truly beautiful and amazing masterpiece, we can say, right?
I didn't know that Adam and Eve's portraits were up on that wall.
It has, yeah. It's amazing, right? This is truly, yeah, I love it too. You know, When you have a chance to, you know, travel Rome, the Vatican, you know, when you visit Rome, I highly recommend to visit the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel, to see this real painting in the Sistine Chapel. That looks amazing and it is so overwhelmed. You should go. I went there about 15 years ago, a long time ago. Was so amazing. You should go there. Yeah. You should see it in person. You're gonna love it. So as you can see, the ceiling frescoes were an immediate success, and Michelangelo continued as a papal favorite. So Pope Paul III encouraged the Michelangelo, the sculptor, to work as an architect now. In 1546, Paul named Michelangelo the official architect of the new St. Peter's, one of the 4 most important churches in Rome. So this is the church. By the time he began work on the project, Michelangelo was an old man, well into his 70s and physically tired. But his creative vigor was undiminished. So Michelangelo did not live to see his church finished. The magnificent central dome was complete after his death by another architect. So there is a video to show the beautiful church in the Model Room page. So please watch it after this meeting. And this is the last master, Raphael. The Raphael is the last master of the Renaissance. He was a slightly younger rival of Michelangelo. His work is admired for its clarity of form, ease of composition, and visual achievement of the Neoplatonic ideal of human grandeur. So we know, everyone knows this painting, right? So this is Raphael's, the most famous painting, the School of Athens. This painting is in the new St. Peter's Church, which was the Michelangelo's last work. The nearly every great Greek philosopher is present in the work now, including the 2 main subjects located at the fresco's central vanishing point here, Plato and his student Aristotle. In one of his earliest work, Raphael painted 3 of the Graces from classical mythology. And this painting is best known for the 2 winged angels at the very bottom of the composition. The Sistine Madonna is an oil painting that was commissioned in 1512 by Pope Julius II for the Church of San Sisto in Piacenza. So on its completion in 1512, this rendering of Pope Julius II was unlike any previous papal portrait. So usually popes were painted frontally or kneeling in profile. The Pope, Pope Julius II was not frontally and not in profile. Also, the exceptional part is this one. Now, that was the facial expression, showing the subject lost in thought. And this oil painting was produced in 1505 in Venice. Madonna del Prado exemplifies a religious theme. It depicts Mother Mary with Jesus Christ and John the Baptist. In this painting, Mary is guarding the two children. So, compared to the previous two masters, Raphael's paintings are very soft and smooth. So it makes viewers feel comfortable to see. So the scholars generally date the end of the High Renaissance in Italy to the death of Raphael in 1520. Of the various artistic trends that emerged, the one that has interested art historians most is known as Mannerism. So now we're going to see the Mannerism. So the late Renaissance in Italy is called Mannerism. The word Mannerism comes from the Italian maniera, means style or stylishness. And it was originally used to suggest that these painters practiced an art of grace and sophistication. Later critics characterized Mannerism as a descendant reaction against the order and the balance of the High Renaissance. So today, most scholars agree that Mannerism actually grew out of possibilities suggested by the work of High Renaissance artists, especially Michelangelo, whose influence on the next generation was enormous. So look at the left painting examples. So these are Michelangelo's, ceiling painting from the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. So compared to the other two masters, Michelangelo's painting style is a little bit more exaggerated. And now let's look at the right painting, the Mannerism painting. So it's, it looks more exaggerated than the Michelangelo, but it's pretty much persuasive that Mannerism grew out of the Michelangelo's style, right? We can see the continuous flow of the art movement. Compared to the art that came before it, works in the late phase of the Renaissance are often depicted in Mannerism, which tends to feature compositions that are more chaotic, emphasize movement, and possesses greater emotional intensity. So the successes of the High Renaissance could not be rivaled, like Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo were thought to have achieved perfection in the arts. So artists were faced with the predicament of where to go from there. In reaction, instead of harmony, many artworks stressed dissonance. So distortion and disproportion were intentionally used to emphasize certain anatomical features and themes. So rather than mathematically precise depictions, artists created ambiguous spaces with multiple focal points, just like this painting. And the Renaissance became widespread in North Europe. So there is a video about the Renaissance in the North Europe in the Moodle Room page. So please watch the video to see the diverse and beautiful Renaissance work of art. And we have a sketchbook project today related to this chapter. Can you guess what it is? You will-
Renaissance.
Yeah, Renaissance, definitely Renaissance. This is it. A perspective drawing. So we learned the Renaissance, and the masters of the Renaissance discovered and used the perspective drawing technique to create the implied space on the two-dimensional surface. So we are going to do the perspective drawing to understand their technique for the sketchbook project. Are you excited?
Yay.
Yay! So, so the perspective linear or point projection perspective is one of the two types of graphical projection perspective in the graphic art. Linear perspective is an approximate representation, generally on a flat surface, such as paper, of an image as it is seen by the eye. So let me just show you the example. This is the Last Supper we just saw, by Leonardo da Vinci. So in this painting, he used one-point linear perspective with the vanishing point on the center. And here's another example of the one-point linear perspective drawing. See, all the lines go to the center at one point. And this is the two-point linear perspective.
Excuse me, Professor, can you enlarge those images?
Which one? This one?
Yes, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just me, but I only see it as a small tile.
Small tile, really?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Much better.
I see it just fine.
Better? All right. So this is the two-point linear perspective example. It is a good technique to show a dynamic view with foreshortening in a drawing. And this is another example of two-point linear perspective. So as you can see, the two-point perspective drawing is slightly harder than the one-point perspective because of adding one more point in the drawing. That makes a little bit more complicated. So for this project, you will need a sketchbook, ruler. You need a ruler, pencil, eraser, and any color medium you have. And I will give you 9 options for this project. Please choose one of the perspective options and must draw one of the options based on the 1 or 2-point linear perspective. So, and as usual, please write, which option you choose and post your work process image picture in the Moodle Room forum. So now let me share the options. The option file is posted in the week 11 of the Moodle Room. So you can see it while you are drawing. So this is the first option with the 2-point linear perspective. So on the right corner, you will see the perspective guide. You don't need to worry about it. You can just follow this perspective guide and then just add the details on it. And the second option is the 1-point linear perspective like this, with the vanishing point on the center. And the third option is 2-point linear perspective. It looks complicated. This one is a hard one. And the fourth option is 2-point linear perspective. And the fifth one is 2-point linear perspective. And the sixth one It's 2-point linear perspective. So this one, even though it's the 2-point linear perspective, but it is very easy to draw. It's not really hard. And this is the 7th option, the first linear perspective with the vanishing point. So the vanishing point is covering, is hiding from the left wall. It's right here. The 8th option is 1-point linear perspective. And the last option is 2-point linear perspective. So that's all the options. So now let me just show you the process. So first, you're gonna select an image among the options you just saw. And again, the option image file is in the Moodle Room page in week 11. And next, check out your image, and then whether the first 1 or 2-point linear perspective, and sketch the image option on your sketchbook. Lastly, you're gonna color on it. So you don't need to draw all of them. You can just, so this is the study to learn how to draw the perspective structure, like a room. So you don't need to draw everything, if you draw the big structure, it will be fine. So now I will show you how to draw the 1-point or 2-point perspective drawing. I've recorded the drawing process before, so I'm going to share the video. So I chose, like, this one is the option 2 with the 1-point linear perspective. So so I'm gonna find all the perspective lines and then go find the vanishing point with the ruler. So by today, you're gonna just post the process. You don't need to finish it today, but by the end of the course, you have to finish all the sketchbook project. So for the perspective drawing, you know what? With the ruler, you can just follow all the ceiling and the bottom lines. Like that. The ceiling line. I'm gonna draw the ceiling line. So this is just a guide. So I just want to show you the how to find the perspective lines. So I'm just drawing the guideline. You don't need to draw it, but if you draw it, it's pretty much it's so much help to draw a perspective drawing. And then I'm gonna make all the angled from the left side like this. See? All the left lines on the wall. All the lines go to the vanishing point. And now, see, I just found the right walls on the angled line. And the window line. That's it. And then based on this guideline, you're gonna just draw all the vertical lines on this perspective guideline. So this is the actual drawing process. So I just find the vanishing point right? And then starting from the ceiling, the left ceiling line. Because that's the main criterion. Somehow I just started to draw the vertical line first. Like this. So you can just keep drawing, following all the perspective guideline like this. And again, you don't need to draw everything, but I want you to draw the big structure and the big objects from your image like this. See? So that's the finished work. And also I chose the, what is it? It's option 6 for the 2-point linear perspective. So you can just sketch like that and then color it. Just do your best. All right, so again, by tonight, I want you to post your work process here, week 11.2. And as you can see, the video, the drawing process video is already posted in this perspective drawing forum. So you can just, rewatch it if you want. And also after this meeting, please go to week 11.2, the Renaissance page. And you will see all the video links for the masters, the Renaissance masters works. So please watch these videos again.
Professor,